The steak knife was still in my hand when her phone buzzed on the table. One glance, and the name on the screen cut deeper than any blade ever could. Ethan. I knew that name. The one she swore was buried in her past. The man she told me had been just a phase. The man I never thought I'd see in our lives again. Her fork hovered mid-air, a piece of asparagus trembling between the tines. She didn't notice me freezing, didn't notice my hand stiffening on the knife. I expected her face to flush with guilt. I expected her to snatch the phone, hide it, lock it away like a secret shame. Maybe even stammer out a lie, something rehearsed, something insulting in its predictability. But instead, she did something else. Something so bold, so unnerving, that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. I expected drama. I expected excuses. What I got left me staring across the dinner table, my entire world tilting on its axis. Because in that split second, she didn't even look afraid. I never thought a single name on a glowing screen could unravel years of my life. But maybe that's where the truth begins, not at the dinner table, but much further back, when I thought I understood what love was. Her name is Claire. My wife. My anchor. Or at least, that's what I told myself through the years. We weren't the kind of couple people whispered about or envied, we were ordinary, and I think that's what made it feel safe. We had our little routines. I'd brew the coffee in the mornings, 2 sugars for her, none for me. She'd hum off-key in the shower, some old pop song that stuck in my head the whole day. Evenings were ours, we cooked together more often than we ordered in. I'd chop the onions, blinking through the sting, while she teased me about crying over vegetable funerals. She was quick with her jokes, sharp and bright, the kind of humor that turned a tired night into something I looked forward to. We had rituals. Friday nights were reserved for our private movie marathons, bad 90s thrillers, the cheesier the better. We'd sit wrapped in one blanket, trading sarcastic commentary until we laughed so hard the neighbors must have heard. To anyone else, it was mundane. To me, it was everything. I sacrificed for us, though I never thought of it as a sacrifice back then. I worked long hours at a job I didn't love, turning down opportunities that would have taken me away from her. I convinced myself stability mattered more than ambition. If the company asked for weekends, I gave them. If money was tight, I tightened my belt, never hers. And every time I walked through the door late, weary-eyed, she'd smile at me like I was worth the wait. That smile could erase the weight of any day. Claire was magnetic in ways I couldn't fully explain. She wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads in a crowd, at least, not immediately. Her beauty was quieter, revealed in fragments. The tilt of her chin when she was thinking, the flicker of mischief in her eyes, the way her laugh could thaw even the iciest room. People remembered her, though. They always remembered her. And I adored her. More than that, I built my life around her, like every choice was a brick laid at her feet. I still remember our first date. A cramped coffee shop, rain streaking the window beside us. She was late, 15 minutes, but when she arrived, she came rushing in with that smile that apologized before words could. I told her I didn't mind, though I had been restless, tapping my cup like a fool. She talked fast, hands moving as much as her lips, and I sat there stunned that someone could make the air feel so alive. We struggled in the beginning, like all young couples do. Money was thin, tempers sometimes frayed. There were nights when dinner was just toast and laughter, when we fought about things that didn't matter and made up in ways that did. I thought those battles forged us, tempered us. Every storm we weathered became proof we were unbreakable. There was one shadow, though. His name came up early on, Ethan. Not often, but enough for me to remember. An old flame, she called him once, brushing it off with a shrug. He was just a phase. A mistake I learned from. Her tone had been firm, dismissive, and I never pressed. Why would I? We all have our ghosts, don't we? And hers, I believed, had been laid to rest. At least, that's what I let myself believe. I trusted her blindly. That was my first mistake. Because trust, when given without question, is a blade you hand to another person, one they can use to defend you, or to cut you open when you least expect it. Looking back now, I wonder if I missed the signs. The subtle cracks in our so-called stable marriage. The moments when her eyes lingered too long on her phone. The days when her laughter seemed muted, like it was saved for someone else. But at the time, I saw only what I wanted to see. A woman I loved, a life we had built, and a future that felt certain. So when her phone buzzed that night at dinner, and his name appeared on the screen, glowing like a wound, everything I thought I knew about us began to bleed away. It didn't happen all at once. That's the cruelest thing about betrayal, it seeps in like a slow leak, barely noticeable until the foundation beneath you is already rotting. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Claire started coming home later than usual. She'd always been punctual before, 6 o'clock, give or take 10 minutes, walking through the door with the faint scent of her perfume still clinging from the office. Now it was closer to 7, sometimes 8. She had excuses ready, traffic, deadlines, a meeting that ran over. They were believable enough, the kinds of explanations that don't raise suspicion unless you're already looking for reasons to doubt. I wasn't. Not then. I wanted to believe her. But even as I convinced myself, the cracks widened. Dinner changed. Our table, once filled with easy chatter and laughter, grew quieter. She would eat quickly, distracted, phone resting beside her plate like an uninvited guest. Every buzz or ding pulled her eyes away, and though she tried to mask it, I noticed how her fingers twitched toward the screen like it held oxygen. I'd ask about her day, and her answers grew shorter. Fine. Busy. Exhausting. No stories, no little anecdotes about coworkers or mishaps on the commute. Just clipped words, as though conversation was something to be endured. One night, I watched her scroll through her phone between bites of pasta. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, a private one, meant for someone else. When I asked what was funny, she locked the phone immediately and shook her head. Nothing. Just a stupid meme. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. The first real fracture came late one evening. I woke up to an empty bed. The clock read 2:17 a.m. I padded softly into the living room, and there she was, sitting cross-legged on the couch, the glow of her phone illuminating her face. She didn't notice me right away, and in that unguarded moment I saw her expression. Not tired. Not irritated. But alive. Lit from within, like the way she used to look at me. When she realized I was standing there, she was startled and quickly turned off the screen. You scared me, she whispered, hand to her chest. Couldn't sleep, I murmured. Who were you talking to? Her hesitation was too long. Then came the smile, gentle, practiced. Just scrolling. You know me, I can't turn my brain off at night. I nodded, though my stomach tightened. I wanted to press further, but what would that say about me? That I didn't trust her. That I was the jealous type she used to roll her eyes at in stories about old boyfriends. So I swallowed it. I went back to bed. And I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, convincing myself I was imagining things. The secrecy grew bolder. She started angling her phone away when I walked into her room, slipping it into her pocket mid-conversation. Her laughter became something I overheard from behind doors, not something she shared with me. One Saturday afternoon, I heard her in the kitchen, voice low and urgent. I paused at the hallway corner, listening. No, I can't talk right now, yes, I miss you too. The words struck like ice water. My pulse hammered in my ears. But before I could step forward, her tone shifted, casual, light-hearted. She was suddenly talking about groceries. By the time I entered, she was rinsing lettuce in the sink, phone face down on the counter. Who was that? I asked. My voice cracked despite my effort to keep it calm. She didn't miss a beat. Maya. She wanted to know if we're still on for brunch tomorrow. A lie, clean and easy. And I let it stand. Everything okay? I asked her that night in bed. She rolled toward me, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Of course. You worry too much." The reassurance felt empty, but I clung to it anyway. Because the alternative, that she was slipping away, was too terrifying to face. I started noticing the small changes in myself. How I'd linger in doorways, listening. How I'd memorize the rhythm of her keystrokes on the phone in the dark, trying to decode them like a foreign language. How I'd watch her thumb flick across the screen, so fast, so practiced, as though she were racing against time itself. I caught glimpses. Half sentences. A notification banner here, a laughing emoji there. Nothing incriminating on its own, but enough to build a pattern. Enough to feed the gnawing suspicion that something wasn't right. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. We were eating takeout on the couch, some forgettable Thai place. Her phone buzzed. She didn't notice I was watching. The name lit up the screen. Ethan. My blood turned to stone. It was only for a second before she swiped the notification away, screen going black. But in that second, I felt the floor drop out from under me. The name I dismissed as a ghost, the past she swore was nothing, alive again, pulsing across her phone like a heartbeat. Who was that? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She glanced up, startled. What? Your phone. Just now. Oh. She waved it off too casually. Work thing. But I had seen it. I knew what I saw. And the way she avoided my eyes, the way her fork suddenly became the most interesting thing on the planet, it told me more than her words ever could. That night, I lay beside her as she slept, her back turned toward me. I stared at the curve of her shoulder in the moonlight, at the soft rise and fall of her breath. Once, that sight had filled me with peace. Now, it fills me with dread. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was letting paranoia eat me alive. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't just stress. This wasn't just distance. And it sure as hell wasn't my imagination. Something was happening. Something she didn't want me to see. And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the truth, or if I was terrified of what it would destroy. I used to think heartbreak was loud. That it would come with shouting, with slammed doors, with the kind of screaming matches people in movies have before someone storms out. But real heartbreak? It's quiet. It's the sound of a phone buzzing in the dark, of whispered laughter behind closed doors. It's the silence of a truth you don't want to face, pressing down on you until you can't breathe. That silence became my world. The proof came one night when she left her phone unattended on the nightstand. It was so unlike her. Normally, the device was glued to her hand, never out of reach, always face down. But she had gone to shower, humming as if she didn't have a care in the world, and the screen lit up with a soft vibration. A message. From Ethan. My chest constricted, but my hands moved before I could stop them. The passcode was easy, I knew it, she'd trusted me with it years ago. The betrayal was not that she hid her password. The betrayal was that she no longer cared if I looked. The conversation unfurled like a dagger to the gut. Ethan, I can't stop thinking about last weekend. Claire, me neither. I feel alive again when I'm with you. Ethan, he has no idea, does he? Claire, of course not. He never notices anything. He's too busy, too tired, too boring. My heart stuttered, then dropped. My eyes devoured the words, disbelieving yet unable to look away. Too boring. That's how she described me. The man who built our life brick by brick, who gave up opportunities to keep us together, who worshipped her in ways I never admitted out loud. To her, I was nothing but predictable. Replaceable. The messages continued, each one twisting the knife deeper. Talk of stolen moments. Of longing. Of inside jokes I wasn't part of. She told him secrets, my secrets. Complaints I'd trusted her with in the privacy of our marriage bed, turned into fodder for mockery between her and him. I read every word. Every emoji. Every declaration of how she missed him, how he still knew her better than anyone. By the time I heard the bathroom door click open, I had placed her phone back on the nightstand. My hands were trembling so violently I had to sit on them to stop. She stepped into the room wrapped in a towel, smiling faintly when she saw me awake. "You're still up?" I nodded, my throat too tight to form words. "Try to get some rest," she said softly, climbing into bed beside me. She smelled of lavender soap, her skin warm and damp from the shower. I wanted to recoil. Instead, I lay there, stiff and silent, while she drifted into sleep as if nothing had shattered between us. And I stared at the ceiling, reading those words again and again in my mind, each one a brand on my heart. The next day, I tried to confront her. Not directly, I didn't have the strength yet. Instead, I prodded. Testing her. "Claire," I asked quietly over breakfast, "do you ever think about the past? About old relationships?" She looked up from buttering her toast, her expression unreadable. "Why would I? I don't know. Just curious." She laughed, short and dismissive. "You really do worry too much." The conversation ended there, but her words lingered. I could hear the gaslight hissing even as she smiled. I checked her phone more often after that, though never when she could catch me. Each time, I found more. Photos, not explicit, but intimate. A picture of them at a cafe, her smile wider than it had been in months. Him holding her hand across the table. The texts grew bolder. "Claire, sometimes I wonder why I ever left you." "Ethan, because you had to. But we're fixing that now, aren't we?" "Claire, yes. Soon. Soon." What did that mean? Soon, she'd leave me. Soon, she'd trade our life for him. The thought hollowed me. And yet, every time I looked at her across the dinner table, her face calm, her eyes innocent, I felt myself teetering between rage and denial. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw the phone in her face and demand the truth. Another part wanted to pretend I hadn't seen anything, to cling to the fragile illusion that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. But I wasn't. The breaking point came at dinner. We were eating steak and asparagus, her favorite. I had tried, foolishly, to recapture something of us. The meal was a ritual, one we hadn't shared in weeks. I lit a candle. I poured wine. I carved the meat with steady hands even as my heart trembled. For a while, it almost felt normal. She smiled at something trivial I said. She reached across the table once, her fingers brushing mine. And then her phone buzzed. It vibrated against the wood, the screen lighting up between us. "Ethan." I froze. My knife hovered mid-cut. This was it. The moment I'd been bracing for, dreading and expecting all at once. Her eyes flicked down. And instead of the panic I anticipated, instead of shame or denial, she did something else. She picked up the phone. She read the message. And then she tilted the screen toward me, showing me the words as if daring me to react. "Ethan, I miss your lips. When can I see you again?" The words burned themselves into my skull. Claire's expression was calm. Cold. Almost defiant. "There," she said quietly. "No more secrets." I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. In that moment, I realized something far worse than her betrayal. The woman I loved didn't fear losing me at all. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. I didn't eat much either. Something in me had changed, not the part that loved her, but a colder, quieter limb that moved with a purpose I barely recognized. Grief sat beside me like a patient watcher. It taught me how small and precise anger could be. On the fourth day I stopped being the man who begged for answers. I put on a shirt that didn't wrinkle at the collar and started practicing a smile I could wear like armor. House guests would call me steady. My mother remarked that I looked better, less stressed. Claire told a friend I seemed so supportive. All of it felt like a costume I wore to bed and took off behind closed doors. The first rule I taught myself was this: never let her see the part of me that was breaking. If she believed I was fragile, she would take the path of least resistance. She would leave and think she'd won. So I built a mask. Calm. Even-tempered. Kind in that sterile way people are kind to strangers. Underneath, I was calculating. I started small. Evidence. Not because I wanted to hurt her for the sake of hurting her. Not because I wanted to scream and claw at the walls. I wanted certainty. The truth is a currency, it buys planning time. If she was planning to walk out of our life, I needed to know when and how. I needed to know if I could protect what mattered to me and, if not, how to ensure she didn't take me down with her. I hired a private investigator. I'll say it plain, this is fiction, but it's also a thing people do. I wanted professional eyes. Someone who could follow routine without the weight of my face showing up in every frame. The investigator brought me details: coffee shop meetups, late dinners across town, a rented Airbnb for a weekend work retreat that was anything but. Photos that didn't need captions. Times, dates, a pattern. His reports read like the minutes of a life that wasn't my own anymore. You should have seen me then, civil at brunch, polite with our friends, while my phone held evidence I couldn't unsee. I printed pages. I labeled them. I made a box and slid everything into it: screenshots, receipts, maps with pins. The box was not for burning. It was a ledger. A ledger that told the truth and would make any future denial impossible. At the same time I started protecting myself. Not illegal things. Legal things that required no moral explanation. I opened a bank account in my name and funneled money there. I closed old shared cards I had access to and quietly scheduled new ones. I downloaded and archived conversations on platforms Claire used. I copied emails. I made sure I had paper trails for the things that mattered: our home ownership documents, financial statements, any contracts that might be relevant. I met with an attorney under the pretense of a business question, and then, once I had her attention, I asked about separation logistics, asset divisions, and how to secure accounts fast. The lawyer asked questions I flinched at. I answered with a steady voice and looked up at the ceiling when things got too raw. People always imagine revenge as dramatic. They picture fires, smashed glass, and shouted accusations in front of friends. That wasn't my style. I wanted to clean. Surgical. Something that would leave no doubt about the consequences and would hurt in a way that reverberated long after the initial shock. Humiliation is cheap. Legal consequences and the slow unraveling of a lie are not. There were setbacks. Doubts that came wearing familiar faces. Late at night I would stand in our kitchen and stare at the kettle, thinking of the old days. I wanted to call her, to wake her gently, to ask why. I wanted the version of us that made coffee together and misread each other's moods. Once, or maybe twice, I almost told the investigator to stop. I almost ripped the evidence to shreds and went back to being the man who trusted. Guilt came next. Images of her face when she'd first said, "I do." The way she'd nuzzled into my shoulder on winter mornings. The small, shameful love I still harbored. But grief is a strange teacher, it can turn affection into a microscope. The more I examined her, the more I found small cruelties that had been masked as jokes. Little digs about my job, offhand remarks about my predictability, lines that had been repeated in texts I'd read in secret. Those things grounded me. They fed the cold resolve. So I steeled myself. I rehearsed our life like a play where I knew the ending. I kept being the husband who listened when she talked about the office. I even gave her space sometimes, because seething claws are easier to hide when you look generous. And while I performed, I prepared. Preparation was not glamorous. It was hours of sitting in my car outside her favorite cafes, noting the license plates of cars she got into. It was checking dates at the registry to confirm the timing of a lease she'd helped a friend with. It was discovering that she had signed a small life insurance policy we'd never discussed, naming Ethan as a beneficiary on a whim, or perhaps, I later learned, by clever persuasion. That discovery made my stomach hollow. I called my attorney again. "You can't just change everything overnight," she said, measured. "But you can protect yourself. Freeze joint accounts. Reassess beneficiaries for your policies. Document everything. You're not the first to go through this, but you can make it much harder for her to walk away with everything." Harder. I liked the sound of that. I documented. I photographed. I recorded what I was entitled to record legally, and when I stepped over moral lines, it was only in my head. I never gave in to imagining violent retribution. That was not an option, nor a story I would tell. Instead, I put my energy into structures, legal appointments, a plan for custody if that became a thing, contingency funds, a letter prepared to send to our social circle if it became necessary to reveal truths publicly. I drafted it longhand at first, then typed and deleted it and typed it again. It was honest, surgical, and cold. It named what she had done. It left out my dirty thoughts. There were practical, petty things too. I changed passwords she thought she knew. I made triple backups of files she assumed were gone. I removed her name from some of our accounts where possible, citing security reasons. These are small humiliations. They are also safeguards. I did them with a sick, steady satisfaction. People often ask how someone can plan revenge and still sleep at night. I didn't sleep much, but when I did, it was because the work calmed me. The list I kept, names, dates, options, was a talisman. It proved I had control. Not everything went smoothly. Once, I nearly blew it. We were at a dinner party and Claire started to play a game, one of those made-up social quizzes that people use to flirt. She laughed loudly at an inside joke and I saw Ethan's name flash on her phone. For a second I fumbled, my hand knocking the glass of water. A friend asked if I was all right. I smiled. "Just clumsy," I said. The moment passed. But the close call taught me something crucial: ambushes don't work. Impulse doesn't work. The plan had to be patient. Patience became my virtue and my curse. I stopped wanting immediate satisfaction. I wanted a result that would not be easily forgotten. I wanted consequences that would stick to her like a stain. There were other things I did that aren't glamorous and that I won't narrate like a how-to guide. I checked tax filings only insofar as I could see how tangled our finances were. I ensured that the house title, if contested, would not slip away because of an overlooked clause. I prepared alternate living arrangements. I moved some of my personal papers to a safety deposit box. I updated passwords for retirement accounts. These are boring sentences but crucial actions. I remind myself of them when I look back, because they show that revenge, for me, became less about spectacle and more about protection and truth. Emotionally, I rehearsed the endgame like a monk rehearses a prayer. If she chose to leave, I would not be blindsided. If she chose to expose our wreckage publicly, I would be ready with documents and timelines that made her lies implausible. If she tried to gaslight me again, I had receipts she couldn't deny. Doubt remained. Often. At odd, human hours, watching an old movie alone, hearing our song, seeing a coffee cup she'd once liked, I would slide into weakness. I hit the box of evidence and thumbed through it. Photographs of a life we once shared, receipts for birthdays, a movie stub with her lipstick smeared on it. Each object was a fossil of love. I wanted to smash them. I wanted to bury them. But I knew their value. The past was my currency and, cruelly, her clearest indictment. There was one more thing I did that felt like crossing a threshold. I wrote a short note to myself, no one else. It said, "Do this cleanly. Do not become them. Revenge is not victory if you lose your face in the mud." I folded it and tucked it into my wallet. Some days I read it and it steadied me. Some nights I forgot I had written it at all. The plan had stages. Quiet exposure. Legal recalibration. Public clarity if needed. Each stage had its triggers mapped out. A missed meeting. A lie we could prove. A document that contradicted her story. I did not want an explosion. I wanted an unspooling, a tidy, undeniable truth that left her with the consequences of her choice. No blood, no fists. A slow, public unmasking that would make people ask questions she would find hard to answer. By the time I was ready to act, I had become a man of careful, patient intentions. The grief had not softened, it had sharpened. I was no longer boyishly in love. I was a man who had learned that love, when weaponized by another, must be defended or reclaimed. One night, at the sink, I caught my reflection in a dark window. The man looking back at me had my eyes, but they were rationed. There was a kind of peace in that rationing. I breathed in and out once, twice. The box of evidence sat on my desk, labeled and heavy. The next step was execution. I had rehearsed it in the car, in my head, in the dead hours. I had made contingency plans for when she would try to blame me. I had lawyers on speed dial. I had friends who could corroborate timelines. I had the quiet, cold satisfaction of a man who had done the paperwork on his own disintegration and refused to be surprised by it. When I closed my laptop that night I felt like a surgeon readying for an operation. I felt tragic and controlled all at once. And somewhere far from that feeling, Claire laughed in her sleep like she still owned me. I folded the note in my wallet, slid it back in, and whispered into the dark, "Soon." I wanted the moment to look like fate. I wanted it to feel like some cosmic coincidence that left them exposed and me composed. People always remember the reveal, not the months it took to build the scaffold. The night I chose was quiet, domestic, exactly what made it work. I invited Claire to a reconciliation dinner. I told her I wanted to try one last honest conversation. She laughed softly over the phone, amused and indulgent. "After everything?" "Really?" she said. The tone was half teasing, half contemptuous. That laugh would be cartilage to my plan. I booked a private room at the restaurant we'd celebrated our anniversary in years before. It had small windows, linen napkins, candles that never seemed to burn down. I told only the people who needed to be there, my lawyer, an old friend who could vouch for timelines, and one person who would be the line between privacy and public collapse, a food critic I discreetly befriended months earlier. He owed me a favor after I'd tipped him off to a small expose. He loved good theater. I did not tell Claire. I did not tell Ethan. Claire arrived in that practiced casualness of someone who believed she could wear charm like armor. She wore the dress she knew I liked, the one with the small dip at the collar. She hugged me in front of the hostess, kissed me on the cheek like a woman half in control and fully uninterested. Ethan came later. I hadn't invited him, but I'd predicted he would appear. He always did when Claire called. He slid into the booth opposite me, sliding his fingers along his glass with the bored familiarity of a man used to impunity. He smiled a little too quickly when he saw me. There was a confidence in him, young, smug, convinced he could outcharm a lifelong habit. I'd rehearsed everything. My script was short, calm, factual, surgical. No melodrama. Let emotion be their trap. Claire started in, as she always did, with a joke about the food. Ethan made a throwaway comment about a song they'd shared. I let them float for a few minutes, let the old habit of companionship fill the air so the reveal would land harder. People notice abrupt stops more than slow ones. I wanted the stop to be freezing. When the waiter served the appetizer, my phone buzzed in my pocket. My lawyer glanced at me, nodded, and did something only a lawyer can do in a public place. She sent a short, precise email to a list of recipients. I felt the click of fate in my chest. The first message was simple: to Claire. To Ethan. To those in their orbit. This is to inform you that an injunction petition has been filed naming Claire H. and Edward Ethan L. Allegations: conspiracy for fraudulent transfer of joint marital assets, beneficiary manipulation, and coordinated misrepresentation. Effective immediately, a temporary asset freeze and an order to preserve all records. I slid the email across the table toward Claire like a folded note. She picked it up, eyebrows raised. Her face shifted through several expressions: confusion, amusement, then an edge of calculation. Ethan scowled, reaching for his phone. What is this? Claire asked, voice level. Not afraid. Not yet. Legal counsel, I said. My voice was cool. I watched them, two predators who thought their own breath smelled like victory. There are some documents I think you should see. The envelope I slid across next contained printed pages, screenshots, bank statements, time-stamped emails. I had not spoken of these in weeks, but the paper did what speech could not: it contradicted them. There were messages from Ethan, explicit enough to erase any doubt. There were bank ledger entries showing attempted transfers. There was the life insurance beneficiary change flagged with dates that coincided suspiciously with a weekend they had both worked away. They read in silence. Claire's mouth thinned. Ethan's jaw worked slowly like a trap closing. You're making a scene, Claire said finally, but it was a breath more fragile than I'd ever heard her voice. I'm making the truth obvious, I answered. I kept my hands flat on the table. I did not shout. I did not grab it. My lawyer had already set the legal gears in motion: filings that would prevent immediate dissipation of funds, notices that would make any bank think twice before clearing a questionable transfer. Those forms are not glamorous, they are bureaucracy. But bureaucracy is a kind of cold justice. It moves slowly and it chokes quickly. Ethan opened his mouth to say something, an insult, a denial, but the critic I'd invited cleared his throat and spoke with the kind of mild, public curiosity that makes people feel suddenly under a microscope. Excuse me, he said. Do you mind if I ask? He slid back his chair, stood, and with the quiet authority of someone who had been promised a show, he pulled out his phone and typed. Within a minute, the restaurant manager walked in, polite and wary. In the modern age, an influencer's single tap can make the invisible visible. The manager, flipping through the pages I'd left on the table, called someone. The room tightened. Claire's eyes flashed. You set this up, she accused. You brought a crowd. No crowd, I said. Just the people who will hear both sides. I tapped the table. And the record. She tried to smile. It curled and broke somewhere between pride and panic. Ethan leaned forward, voice sharp. This is ridiculous. You have no evidence. Evidence is what lawyers do best, my counsel said, voice soft. We've preserved text chains, requested account holds, and submitted an injunction. Until a judge hears this, certain assets will remain in limbo. That's standard. She took a breath. Additionally, we provided copies of damning communications and a sworn affidavit. As if you'd make this public without cause, Ethan sneered. Publicity isn't my aim, I said. Clarity is. If you'd wanted privacy, you should have thought of the people you were deceiving before you deceived them. The sauce on the table steamed and went unnoticed. Around us, other diners pretended not to listen, but their ears were traitors. They looked at Claire. They looked at Ethan. Faces are fragile tools in a scandal. Look long enough and you'll see people drawing conclusions like curtains. She attacked them in the only way she knew how, words aimed to wound and confuse. You're making a spectacle because you want attention. This is grandstanding. You're trying to punish me for wanting something different. Her voice wobbled now. She was trying to reroute blame. It's the oldest trick, collapse into victimhood. I let her. I let Ethan sputter and plead his ignorance. My lawyer had already filed formal preservation requests with the bank and the insurance company. They had been instructed to hold. The dinner room felt like a court, and I was careful to let the formalities do the damage. People in the restaurant leaned in, breath shallow. A server paused. The critic looked at me with something not quite compassion but satisfaction. He loved a clean plot. Claire's face changed then. Not from fear alone, but from the shock of losing the script. She had always improvised, and improvisation only works when the other actors play along. The moment there were lawyers and formal papers and a record that would go through other hands, she lost the theater. She had no way to pull this back into a private script where she was still the author. There was one last card I'd kept close. Months ago, in a painful act of preservation, I'd recorded a voice message Ethan had left on a voicemail I'd intercepted with legal counsel, an admission veiled in arrogance. I didn't use it lightly. I let the lawyer pull it up on her phone and play it quietly enough that only those at our table heard, the voice, confident and campy, saying, "He'll never know. She's so good at pretending. We'll be careful. We'll take what we want." The sound was flat, ordinary. It corrodes a liar's bravado when their own voice becomes their condemnation. Claire went very still. Ethan's face lost color. He started to speak, then didn't. The waiter, who had witnessed their flirting from the bar last month, looked at the phone and back at them. The manager approached slowly. The private room was no longer private. Claire reached across the table, grabbing the envelope as if to wrench it back into her hands. She flipped through the pages with a speed that suggested fear more than purpose. "These are doctored," she said, breathless. "You made these up." I did not need to prove every single line at that moment. I needed only to make a single truth undeniable: their betrayal had consequences beyond whispers in dim corners. The injunction meant that transfers would be scrutinized. The voice message made their conviction public inside a room of people who would later find each other and compare notes. Once the social scaffolding begins to fail, denial looks very thin. The emotional part of the revenge was almost clinical. I had planned small humiliations, little nails in the coffin. I had quietly told a mutual friend what I'd found, not to gossip, but to anchor the story in someone else's memory. She texted, "Are you okay? I'm hearing things. Do you want me to come by?" She showed up later at my place that night, eyes wide. That was when the narrative began to spread, friend to friend, rumor to verification. The less sensational the rumor sounded, the more people believed it. "He's filed for injunction. It seems serious." That kind of quiet dissemination is often deadlier than a dramatic public scandal. There was a moment after the dinner when everything felt like it had slipped from the world we knew into another temperature. Claire sat in the passenger seat of my car. She'd come with me to talk, she'd said, and she kept her hands folded in her lap like a child. Ethan had disappeared. He texted a few heated lines that my lawyer archived. "This isn't over," he typed. "You can't do this. You already made choices," I said. My voice had the flatness of a man who had counted the costs and accepted them. "I'm not the one ending things badly. You are." Weeks of litigation and paperwork followed. Banks froze suspicious transfers. The insurance company flagged the beneficiary change pending investigation. Friends that had been neutral were suddenly careful with their words. People who had loved Claire's candidness found themselves parroting my lawyer's phrase, "We need to preserve records." It's such an ugly, antiseptic phrase. It smells of courtrooms and waiting rooms and the slow-moving ache of bureaucratic justice. But it works. It paralyzes charm. I'm not proud of the moments when I watched her break like glass. There was the day she realized she could not withdraw money she'd planned to siphon. There was the night she walked into our apartment and found a file, meticulously labeled, on the table with all the receipts she'd hoped wouldn't be noticed. The look on her face that day was a kind of realization that will haunt me, not surprise at being caught, but surprise that someone had cared enough to do the boring work of proof. Ethan tried to salvage things. He posted a statement on his account, a clumsy, half-hearted denial. The critic I'd invited wrote a short piece about the way charm collapses under scrutiny. Social media, that fickle beast, turned. People who had adored her smile began to parse sentence fragments. The public doesn't need a spectacle, it needs a reason to distrust. Once reason enters, charisma dies. In private, Claire fought back with the tools she knew: tears, reproach, apologies that tasted like bargaining chips. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said on a night when the rain tapped the windows. "I never wanted to hurt you." Her voice was full of small, fragile things. But the record is stubborn. Words on paper, messages with time stamps, bank holds, these are not seduced by performative sorrow. The last moment, the one that felt like a closing chord, happened on a Saturday when the court granted a temporary order preventing dissipation of contested assets and requiring both parties to appear for a preservation hearing. She arrived at the courthouse looking like the woman who had never believed consequences would follow. Her scent in the hallway was the same one I'd loved years before and the same one that now struck me like a relic. Ethan did not come. He sent a text, "I can't be part of this." He deleted his accounts shortly after. Cowardice is another kind of admission. They tried everything: claims of entrapment, accusations that I'd manufactured evidence. Each claim met the dry counterweight of timestamps and witnesses. The judge asked for proof. I gave it. The law moved slowly, but it moved inexorably in a way that anger alone never could. In the end, the revenge looked less like a single blow and more like an inevitable accounting. Claire's world did not explode in fireworks. It narrowed. Her options slimmed. Invitations stopped coming. Business contacts called to say they had heard things. People watched the waterfall of small, neutral consequences: no new contracts, no client calls, quiet distance from friends who feared being entangled. On the night it all felt final, we sat across from one another again at our kitchen table. No candles. No pretense. She stared at me as though trying to locate the man she'd once known in the person in front of her. For a long minute there was nothing but the sound of a kettle hissing. "You did this to me," she said at last. It was not the accusation of a woman who thought herself innocent. It was the disbelief of a woman who had miscounted the cost. "I didn't want to," I told her. "You made choices." Her face crumpled in a way that was almost obscene in its finality. There were no more defenses left. No more gaslighting lines to toss. She had used the soft places between us like stepping stones. Those places had crumbled. There is an odd purity to that collapse, a clarity that comes after someone has been stripped of pretense. She said, once, in the beginning of our marriage, that the most dangerous thing is to take something for granted. She meant it as a romantic warning. I understand it differently now. She had taken me for granted. For that, she paid. I stood then and walked to the window. The city lights were small pins. I pressed my hand to the cool glass and felt nothing like triumph. I felt something narrower, a patient satisfaction that a ledger had balanced. She said I was replaceable. That night, she learned some things can never be replaced. The house is quieter now. No laughter in the kitchen, no hurried footsteps down the hallway, no perfumed trail where she once moved like gravity itself. Just silence, steady and clean. I used to hate silence. I thought it meant something was broken. Now I understand it's the sound of a wound finally clotting. Claire still lingers in places, her sweater folded in a drawer, her handwriting on a sticky note left on the fridge months ago. But those are relics, fossils of a woman who no longer exists. The person I loved died the moment she chose him. What walks the earth now is just someone I used to know. Sometimes I catch myself replaying it, the look on her face when Ethan vanished, when the assets froze, when the world no longer bent for her. Shock, then fear, then that hollow recognition that she had gambled and lost. It's the only memory of her that doesn't cut me to ribbons. It's the one that feels fair. I don't dream of her anymore. And if I do, I wake smiling. She thought a message from her past would change our future. She was right, just not the way she hoped.